The control tower at Denver International Airport had seen many strange things over the years, but nothing quite like Captain Sarah Mitchell's flight patterns. While other pilots flew direct routes, Sarah traced deliberate curves across the sky. That made no sense to anyone watching. The other pilots whispered about her behind closed doors. Airport staff exchanged knowing glances when her name appeared on the schedule. Even passengers seemed to sense something was different when they stepped onto her aircraft. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. For 3 years, Sarah had been labeled the airline's bad luck charm. Flights delayed, routes mysteriously altered, passengers complaining about unnecessary turbulence. Her superiors tolerated her only because her safety record was impeccable, not a single incident, not even a minor fender bender on the tarmac. But tolerance wasn't respect, and Sarah felt the weight of every sideways glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered the room. What none of them knew was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just following her instincts when she deviated from standard flight paths. She was following something far more complex, a pattern that would soon reveal itself in the most extraordinary way possible. Sarah Mitchell had always been different. As a child growing up in Portland, Oregon, she would spend hours staring at the sky, tracing invisible lines between clouds with her finger. Her mother, Patricia, initially thought it was just a phase, the same way some children obsess over dinosaurs or collect stamps. But Sarah's fascination with aerial patterns never faded. It only grew stronger. In high school, while her classmates were planning prom dates and college applications, Sarah was studying meteorology textbooks she'd borrowed from the local library. She could predict weather changes 3 days in advance, not from watching the news, but from observing subtle shifts in cloud formations and wind patterns that seemed invisible to everyone else. Her teachers were impressed, but her peers found her obsession unsettling. The military recognized her talent immediately. After graduating from the Air Force Academy, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell became one of the youngest pilots ever to be assigned to reconnaissance missions. Her commanding officers noticed that she had an unusual ability to navigate through dangerous weather systems that would ground other aircraft. Where others saw chaos, Sarah saw patterns. Where others saw random turbulence, she saw predictable flows of air that could be used to her advantage. But the military wasn't the right fit for someone who thought outside conventional parameters. Sarah's tendency to deviate from prescribed flight paths, even when those deviations proved successful, made her superiors uncomfortable. After completing her service obligation, she transitioned to commercial aviation, hoping that civilian flying would give her more freedom to utilize her unique skills. She was wrong. Continental Airways hired Sarah Mitchell in 2019 with high expectations. Her military record was exceptional, her flight hours impressive, and her safety ratings were among the highest they'd ever seen. But within months of her first assignment, problems began to emerge. Not safety problems. Sarah's flights were remarkably smooth and incident-free. The problems were more subtle and in some ways more troubling. Sarah's flights consistently took longer than scheduled. While other pilots followed direct routes from point A to point B, Sarah would request course corrections that added precious minutes to flight times. She would climb to unusual altitudes, descend when other pilots would maintain level flight, and navigate around weather systems that meteorologists insisted were harmless. Her explanations were always technical and logical, but they made little sense to flight controllers, who had been doing their jobs for decades. The complaints started small. Passengers would mention in feedback surveys that their flight felt different. Somehow, flight attendants reported that Captain Mitchell seemed to be fighting the aircraft more than other pilots, constantly making minor adjustments that were barely perceptible but somehow noticeable. Ground crew members began to dread working Sarah's flights because she would spend extra time inspecting the aircraft, checking systems that had already been verified by maintenance teams. The situation escalated when Sarah began what her colleagues called the incident at Chicago O'Hare. During what should have been a routine flight from Denver to Miami, Sarah requested permission to deviate from her assigned altitude 3 separate times. Air traffic control approved the changes, but the pattern was unusual enough that it triggered a formal review. The review found no safety violations, but it raised questions about Sarah's decision-making process. "She's flying like she knows something we don't," complained Captain Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran who had been assigned to mentor Sarah during her first year. "It's not that she's wrong, her flights are actually safer than average. But she's making everyone nervous with these constant adjustments." The nervousness turned to suspicion when Sarah's flight patterns began to show consistency across multiple routes. Data analysts in the airline's operations center noticed that Sarah's deviations weren't random. They followed a subtle but discernible pattern. She would consistently fly slightly north of assigned routes on eastbound flights, slightly south on westbound flights, and would make altitude adjustments that seemed to anticipate weather changes hours before they appeared on radar. The pattern was so consistent that it caught the attention of Dr. Amanda Foster, a meteorologist consulting for the airline's safety department. Dr. Foster had spent 15 years studying atmospheric behavior and had never seen a pilot who seemed to predict weather patterns with such accuracy. She requested access to Sarah's flight data, hoping to understand the methodology behind her seemingly intuitive navigation choices. What Dr. Foster discovered was even more puzzling than she had expected. Sarah's flight paths didn't just avoid bad weather, they seemed to follow air currents that enhanced fuel efficiency and reduced passenger discomfort. Her altitude changes coincided with atmospheric conditions that wouldn't be detected by standard weather monitoring equipment until hours later. It was as if Sarah Mitchell could see the invisible highways of the sky that remain hidden from everyone else. The airline's response was predictable. Instead of recognizing Sarah's unique abilities, they saw her as a liability. Her flight times were consistently longer than industry standards, even though passenger satisfaction scores were surprisingly high. Her fuel consumption was within acceptable ranges, but her route choices made scheduling difficult for operations managers, who needed predictable flight times. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated. Other pilots avoided her in the crew lounge, not out of malice but because they couldn't understand her approach to flying. Flight attendants requested transfers to other flights, claiming that Sarah's constant course corrections made them airsick. Even ground staff began to treat her with polite distance, as if her unconventional methods might somehow be contagious. The breaking point came during a flight from Denver to Boston. In early 2022, Sarah's aircraft encountered what appeared to be clear skies, but she requested permission to climb to an altitude that was significantly higher than normal for that route. Air traffic control approved the change, but within minutes, severe turbulence struck every other aircraft flying at standard altitudes. Sarah's passengers experienced the smoothest flight of their lives, while other flights in the same airspace were diverted to emergency landings. The incident should have vindicated Sarah's methods, but instead, it intensified the scrutiny. How could she have known about turbulence that didn't appear on any weather radar? How could she have predicted atmospheric conditions that surprised meteorologists across the region? The questions weren't asked with admiration, they were asked with suspicion. Sarah's reputation as bad luck became more entrenched with each successful flight. Her colleagues began to attribute her successes to chance rather than skill, reasoning that anyone who flew as strangely as Sarah Mitchell was bound to accidentally avoid trouble eventually. The fact that her accidents happened with remarkable consistency was either ignored or explained away as statistical anomaly. By the summer of 2022, Sarah Mitchell had become the airline's most controversial pilot. Her safety record remained flawless, But her methods were so far outside standard operating procedures that management began looking for reasons to transfer her to ground duties. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, and the isolation became more pronounced. Sarah knew that her career was in jeopardy, but she couldn't change her approach to flying. The patterns she saw in the sky weren't optional. They were as real to her as the instruments on her control panel. She had tried to fly conventional routes, but every time she ignored her instincts, she felt like she was fighting against forces that wanted to guide her toward something important. She just didn't know what that something was yet. The investigation into Flight 447 began on a Tuesday morning in October 2022. But it wasn't the kind of investigation Sarah Mitchell had expected. Detective James Rodriguez from the Denver Police Department's Fraud Unit had been assigned to look into what the airline was calling potential insurance irregularities related to Sarah's flight patterns. The airline suspected that Sarah might be deliberately creating delays to manipulate overtime pay or somehow profiting from her unconventional routing choices. Sarah sat across from Detective Rodriguez in a sterile conference room at Continental Airways headquarters, feeling like a criminal despite having committed no crime. The detective was professional, but clearly skeptical of Sarah's explanations about atmospheric patterns and intuitive navigation. To him, Sarah's behavior looked like elaborate deception designed to mask some hidden agenda. "Captain Mitchell," Detective Rodriguez began, flipping through a thick file of flight records, "your deviation patterns show remarkable consistency. In 18 months, you've requested course corrections on 93% of your flights. That's not normal pilot behavior." Sarah had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, but never from a law enforcement officer. "Detective, I can show you weather data that supports every single one of those decisions. The atmospheric conditions that apparently only you can see," Rodriguez interrupted. "We've consulted with 3 independent meteorologists. None of them can explain your ability to predict weather changes that don't show up on standard radar until hours later." What Sarah didn't know was that her flight patterns had attracted attention from sources far beyond the airline's management. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an atmospheric physicist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, had been tracking unusual flight data as part of a broader study on climate pattern recognition. Sarah's routes had appeared as anomalies in Dr. Vasquez's research, not because they were dangerous, but because they demonstrated an understanding of atmospheric behavior that seemed to exceed current scientific knowledge. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Dr. Vasquez had spent 3 months analyzing Sarah's flight data. Without knowing the pilot's identity, the patterns were so sophisticated that she initially assumed they were generated by advanced computer modeling rather than human decision-making. When she discovered that a single pilot was responsible for all the anomalies, she became convinced that Sarah Mitchell had developed some form of atmospheric prediction system that could revolutionize weather forecasting. Meanwhile, the pressure on Sarah was intensifying from multiple directions. Captain Linda Thompson, Continental Airways chief pilot, had been tasked with conducting a comprehensive review of Sarah's performance. Thompson was a fair but strict administrator who had built her career on adherence to standard procedures. She genuinely wanted to understand Sarah's methods, but she also needed to protect the airline from potential liability. "Sarah, I need you to help me understand what you're doing up there," Thompson said during one of their weekly meetings. "Your passengers love you. We've never had satisfaction scores this high. Your safety record is impeccable. But you're making decisions that our flight operations manual doesn't cover." Sarah tried to explain her process, but the words always sounded inadequate. How could she describe the way wind currents revealed themselves to her as visible streams of energy? How could she explain that she could feel pressure changes in her bones hours before they registered on instruments? Her explanation sounded mystical rather than scientific, which only made her colleagues more suspicious. The situation became more complicated when Sarah's flight patterns began to correlate with significant weather events. In November 2022, she had deviated from a standard route between Denver and Atlanta, adding nearly 20 minutes to the flight time. 6 hours later, a severe storm system moved through the exact path that Sarah had avoided, causing widespread flight cancellations and emergency landings. The correlation was too precise to be coincidental. Dr. Vasquez finally requested a meeting with Sarah, hoping to understand the methodology behind her atmospheric predictions. They met at a coffee shop near the airport, away from the airlines. Increasingly hostile environment. Dr. Vasquez was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an obvious passion for her research. "Captain Mitchell, I've been studying your flight patterns for months," Dr. Vasquez began. "I need to know, are you using some kind of predictive software that we don't know about?" Sarah almost laughed. "I wish it were that simple. Dr. Vasquez, I don't use any special equipment. I just see things differently." "What kind of things?" Sarah hesitated. She had never tried to explain her abilities to a scientist before. "I can see how air moves. Not just current conditions, but how it's going to move. It's like seeing rivers in the sky that are invisible to everyone else." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her skepticism. "Can you predict other weather phenomena? Storms, pressure changes, temperature variations?" "Sometimes. It depends on how clear the patterns are. Some days, the atmosphere is like reading a book. Other days, it's more like trying to read through fog." Their conversation lasted 3 hours. Dr. Vasquez asked detailed questions about Sarah's observations, trying to correlate her descriptions with known atmospheric phenomena. What emerged was a picture of someone who had developed an intuitive understanding of atmospheric behavior that exceeded conventional meteorological training. Understanding Sarah's abilities didn't solve her professional problems. The airline's insurance company had begun its own investigation, concerned about the liability implications of a pilot who operated outside standard procedures. Legal department representatives attended Sarah's flights as observers, documenting every deviation and course correction. The scrutiny was suffocating. Sarah's personal life began to suffer as well. Her relationship with her longtime partner, Maria Santos, became strained as the stress of constant investigation took its toll. Maria worked as a nurse and understood the importance of following established protocols, but she also saw how the airline's suspicion was affecting Sarah's mental health. "You need to just fly normal routes," Maria pleaded one evening after Sarah had spent hours explaining her latest confrontation with management. "Just for a few months. Follow the standard procedures and let this all blow over." Sarah had tried that approach before, but every time she ignored her instincts, she felt physically ill. "Maria, I can't explain it, but when I fly the routes they want me to fly, I feel like I'm putting people in danger. I see problems coming, and I can't just ignore them." The tension reached a breaking point in December 2022, when Sarah was assigned to Flight 1247, a routine red-eye flight from Denver to Miami. The weather forecast was clear. The passenger manifest was full, and airline management had specifically instructed Sarah to follow the standard flight path without any deviations. 3 supervisors would be monitoring her flight from the ground, and any unauthorized course changes would result in immediate suspension. Sarah boarded the aircraft that night, knowing that her career was effectively over. Either she would follow orders and ignore the atmospheric warnings that were already building in her consciousness, or she would trust her instincts and face the consequences of direct insubordination. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of atmospheric pressure changes that wouldn't register on instruments for hours. The standard route would take them directly through what she could sense would become a dangerous weather system. Following orders meant potentially endangering 147 passengers and crew members. The control tower cleared Flight 1247 for takeoff, and Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her career. She could feel the invisible currents of air that would soon become a catastrophic storm system, but she had no way to prove their existence to anyone else. Her reputation, her career, and possibly the lives of everyone on board depended on what she chose to do in the next few minutes. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, Sarah made her choice. She would trust the patterns that only she could see, regardless of the consequences. What she didn't know was that her decision would soon validate everything she had been trying to explain to her skeptical colleagues. The storm system that was building along the standard flight path would become the most dangerous weather event in the region's aviation history. And Sarah Mitchell's seemingly erratic flight pattern would be the only thing standing between 147 people and disaster. Flight 1247 climbed through the midnight sky with 147 souls aboard, unaware that their pilot was about to make a decision that would change everything. In the cockpit, Sarah Mitchell felt the familiar weight of atmospheric pressure building in ways that defied conventional meteorology. Her co-pilot, Captain David Chin, was a by-the-book aviator who had specifically requested this assignment to document Sarah's irregular procedures for the airline's investigation committee. Denver Control, this is Continental 1247 requesting heading change to 270. Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite knowing that this single radio call would likely end her career. David Chun's head snapped toward her. Sarah, what are you doing? We have explicit instructions to maintain course. I'm following a weather pattern that's going to develop into something dangerous, Sarah replied, her hands already adjusting the flight controls. Trust me on this. Trust you? Sarah, there's not a cloud in the sky. Weather radar shows clear conditions for the next 6 hours. In the cabin, flight attendant Rebecca Martinez was serving coffee to passengers in first class when she noticed the subtle shift in the aircraft's direction. After 5 years of flying with various pilots, she had learned to recognize the difference between routine course corrections and something more significant. Captain Mitchell's flights always felt different, more purposeful, as if the aircraft was being guided by invisible hands. Passenger Michael Torres, a meteorologist returning from a conference in Denver, pulled up weather data on his tablet. The forecast showed perfect flying conditions along their route, yet something about the flight felt unusual. He had flown this route dozens of times, and the current trajectory seemed to be taking them significantly north of the normal path. Meanwhile, in the Continental Airways Operations Center, Night Shift Supervisor Karen Walsh was monitoring Flight 1247's progress on her screen. The aircraft's position had deviated from the assigned flight plan by 15 degrees, and the deviation was continuing to increase. She immediately contacted the duty manager, Robert Harrison, who had been specifically assigned to monitor Sarah's flights. She's doing it again, Walsh reported. Unauthorized course change, no weather-related justification. Do you want me to contact the aircraft? Harrison had been dreading this moment. The airline's executive team had made it clear that any deviation from standard procedures would result in Sarah's immediate suspension. But something about the situation felt different tonight. The weather systems across the southeastern United States were behaving strangely, with unexpected pressure changes that didn't match any forecasting models. Dr. Elena Vasquez was working late in her laboratory at the National Center for Atmospheric Research when her computer system triggered an alert. The atmospheric monitoring stations across Colorado and Kansas were registering pressure variations that suggested the formation of a severe weather system. But the pattern was unlike anything she had seen before. It was developing too quickly and in areas where the conditions shouldn't support storm formation. She immediately thought of Sarah Mitchell and pulled up the real-time flight tracking data. Flight 1247 was deviating from its assigned route in a pattern that seemed to anticipate the atmospheric changes her instruments were just beginning to detect. Sarah was flying away from conditions that wouldn't appear on standard weather radar for at least 2 hours. Back on Flight 1247, Sarah continued to make subtle adjustments to their course, following air currents that felt increasingly turbulent. Despite the calm appearance of the night sky, she could sense the built-in energy in the atmosphere, like a musician hearing discord in an otherwise harmonious symphony. The pressure changes were becoming more pronounced, and she knew that a major weather event was developing along their original flight path. David Shun was becoming increasingly agitated. "Sarah, I'm required to report unauthorized course deviations. You're putting both of us in an impossible position. David, I need you to look at the long-range weather models. Check the atmospheric pressure readings from the stations along our original route." Chun reluctantly accessed the weather data, expecting to find the same clear conditions that had been forecast for hours. Instead, he discovered something that made him pause. The barometric pressure readings from ground stations in Arkansas and Tennessee were dropping rapidly, a change that hadn't been predicted by any weather service. "This doesn't make sense," Chun muttered. "These pressure readings suggest severe weather development, but there's nothing on radar." Sarah felt a moment of vindication, but her focus remained on the invisible atmospheric highway she was following. The air currents were becoming more complex, requiring constant adjustments to maintain smooth flight. She could feel the energy building behind them, a massive weather system that was coalescing with frightening speed. In the passenger cabin, several people were beginning to notice the unusual flight path. Janet Cooper, a frequent business traveler, had been tracking their progress on the seatback entertainment system. They were now flying significantly north of the normal route, adding what appeared to be at least 30 minutes to their flight time. "Excuse me," she asked Rebecca Martinez during a drink service. "Is there a weather issue we're avoiding?" Rebecca had learned not to question Captain Mitchell's decisions, even when they seemed inexplicable. "The captain is taking a route that will ensure the smoothest possible flight for everyone." What Rebecca didn't know was that Sarah's route changes were becoming more dramatic. The atmospheric patterns she was following were leading them in a wide arc that would take them hundreds of miles north of their intended destination before curving back toward Miami. To anyone monitoring the flight, it would appear as if Sarah had completely abandoned any pretense of following standard procedures. Dr. Vasquez was now in direct communication with the National Weather Service, sharing her real-time atmospheric data with meteorologists who were struggling to understand the rapidly developing weather pattern. The storm system was forming with unprecedented speed, creating conditions that could prove catastrophic for any aircraft caught in its path. "We need to issue immediate weather advisories for all flights in the southeastern corridor," she told Emergency Coordinator Thomas Bailey. "This system is going to be more severe than anything we've seen in years, but the warnings were coming too late." Multiple aircraft were already committed to flight paths that would take them directly into the developing storm. Only one flight had deviated from the standard route early enough to avoid the worst of the weather system, Flight 1247, on the ground. The investigation into Sarah's actions was intensifying. Detective Rodriguez had been contacted by airline security and was monitoring the flight's progress from the operations center. The deviation was so extreme that it appeared to be either deliberate sabotage or a complete mental breakdown. Either way, it represented a serious threat to passenger safety. "She's either completely lost her mind or she knows something we don't," Rodriguez observed to Harrison. "But either way, we need to get that aircraft on the ground immediately." Harrison was torn between his duty to enforce airline procedures and a growing suspicion that Sarah might be avoiding a genuine threat. The atmospheric data that Dr. Vasquez had shared with the airline showed weather conditions that wouldn't appear on standard radar for hours. But Flight 1247 was already positioning itself to avoid areas where severe weather was predicted to develop. As the night progressed, the weather system continued to intensify. What had begun as unusual pressure readings was now developing into a massive storm complex that stretched across 3 states. The National Weather Service issued severe weather warnings for the entire southeastern corridor, but the warnings came too late for most aircraft already in the air. Sarah continued to follow the atmospheric patterns that only she could perceive, making course corrections that took Flight 1247 further from their destination, but kept them in calm air. She could feel the storm system building behind them like a massive wall of chaotic energy, but her passengers remained comfortable and unaware of the danger they were avoiding. The true test of Sarah's abilities was about to begin. The storm system was reaching its peak intensity, and Flight 1247 was the only aircraft that had positioned itself to avoid the worst of the weather. In the next few hours, Sarah's seemingly erratic flight pattern would either vindicate her unconventional methods or confirm her colleagues' suspicions that she was unfit to fly. What none of them knew was that 147 lives were dependent on Sarah's ability to navigate invisible currents of air that would soon become the most dangerous weather system in aviation history. At 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the storm system that Sarah Mitchell had been avoiding for 3 hours finally revealed itself to the world. Weather radar stations across the southeastern United States suddenly lit up with a massive supercell that had materialized seemingly out of nowhere, stretching from northern Georgia to central Tennessee. The storm was producing winds exceeding 80 miles per hour, hail the size of golf balls, and lightning strikes that illuminated the night sky like a deadly fireworks display. Flight 1247 was now 200 miles north of where it should have been, following a course that appeared completely irrational to everyone except Sarah. She could feel the massive energy signature of the storm system passing beneath them, a violent maelstrom of atmospheric chaos that would have torn their aircraft apart if they had followed the standard flight path. "My God," David Chen whispered as he watched the weather radar display fill with angry red and purple cells. "Sarah, how did you know? This storm wasn't supposed to exist." Sarah's hands remained steady on the controls as she navigated around the northern edge of the system. "I could feel it building hours ago. The pressure changes, the way the air was moving. It was like watching a slow-motion explosion." In the Continental Airways Operations Center, the mood had shifted from anger to astonishment. The same storm that was now dominating every weather radar in the region had been completely invisible just hours earlier. Karen Walsh stared at her monitoring screens in disbelief, watching as multiple aircraft requested emergency diversions to avoid this sudden weather system. "Flight 447 is declaring an emergency," she announced to the room. "They're requesting immediate diversion to Nashville. Southwest 1822 is reporting severe turbulence and possible structural damage." Robert Harrison was coordinating the emergency response when he realized something extraordinary. Of the 14 commercial flights that had been traveling through the southeastern corridor that night, only one had avoided the storm entirely. Flight 1247 was cruising smoothly through clear skies, while every other aircraft in the region was either making emergency landings or fighting for survival in the worst turbulence many pilots had ever experienced. Dr. Elena Vasquez was in constant communication with the National Weather Service, trying to understand how such a massive storm system could have developed without any warning. Her atmospheric monitoring equipment had detected the pressure changes hours earlier, but the speed and intensity of the storm's formation defied all conventional meteorological models. "This is unprecedented," she told Thomas Bailey at the Emergency Coordination Center. "The atmospheric conditions that created this storm should have been visible on radar for at least 6 hours before formation. Instead, we had maybe 30 minutes of warning." Bailey was coordinating rescue operations for the multiple aircraft that had encountered the storm. Dr. Vasquez, we have one flight that seemed to avoid the weather entirely. Flight 1247 deviated from its assigned course hours before the storm appeared on radar. The pilot claimed she was following atmospheric patterns that weren't visible to anyone else. The mention of Flight 1247 immediately caught Dr. Vasquez's attention. That's Captain Sarah Mitchell. I've been studying her flight patterns for months. She has some kind of ability to predict atmospheric changes before they show up on conventional instruments. Meanwhile, aboard Flight 1247, the passengers were finally beginning to understand that something extraordinary was happening. Michael Torres, the meteorologist, had been tracking the storm's development on his tablet and realized that their unusual flight path had taken them safely around a weather system that could have killed them all. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Captain Mitchell's voice over the intercom. "I want to explain why we've taken a longer route tonight. We've been avoiding a severe weather system that developed very quickly along our original flight path. I know this has extended our flight time, but it was necessary to ensure your safety." Passenger Janet Cooper, who had been complaining about the delays, suddenly felt a chill of realization. She pulled up the weather radar on her phone and saw the massive storm system that was now terrorizing the southeastern United States. There, aircraft had somehow threaded the needle between normal flight paths and catastrophic weather. Flight attendant Rebecca Martinez was serving drinks when she overheard Torres talking to another passenger about the storm. "Captain Mitchell saved our lives tonight," he was saying. "If we had followed the standard route, we would have flown directly into the worst part of that system." The gravity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone on board. What had seemed like an unnecessary detour was actually a precisely calculated route that had kept them out of mortal danger. The woman who had been labeled bad luck by her colleagues had just demonstrated a level of atmospheric awareness that bordered on the supernatural. In the cockpit, Sarah was receiving updates from air traffic control about the chaos unfolding across the region. "Continental 1247, be advised that multiple aircraft have declared emergencies due to severe weather. You are currently the only flight in the southeastern corridor reporting smooth conditions. Roger that, Control. We're maintaining our current heading and altitude. Weather conditions are stable along our route." David Chun was staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I thought you were being reckless, but you've just saved 147 lives." Sarah felt a wave of vindication, but her focus remained on the flight. The storm system was still developing, and she could sense additional weather patterns forming that would require more course corrections. "David, this isn't over yet. I can feel another pressure system building to the southwest. We're going to need to adjust our approach to Miami." The news of Flight 1247's miraculous avoidance of the storm was spreading throughout the aviation community. Pilots who had been critical of Sarah's methods were now studying her flight path, trying to understand how she had predicted weather conditions that had caught everyone else completely off guard. Captain Linda Thompson was monitoring the situation from her home, receiving constant updates from the operations center. The same pilot who had been under investigation for irregular procedures had just demonstrated a level of weather prediction that exceeded anything in aviation history. "Get me everything we have on Captain Mitchell's atmospheric prediction methods," she told her assistant, "and cancel that disciplinary hearing scheduled for next week. I think we need to have a very different conversation with her." Detective Rodriguez was also following the developments, but his investigation had taken on a completely different character. What had appeared to be potential fraud or sabotage was now looking like exceptional professional skill. The woman he had suspected of manipulating flight schedules for personal gain had actually been protecting passengers from weather systems that conventional meteorology couldn't detect. Dr. Vasquez was documenting everything, knowing that Sarah's flight pattern would become a case study in atmospheric prediction that would be analyzed for years to come. The ability to sense weather changes hours before they appeared on radar represented a breakthrough in understanding atmospheric behavior that could revolutionize aviation safety. As Flight 1247 continued toward Miami, Sarah made additional course corrections that took them around two smaller weather systems that were forming in the storm's wake. Each deviation was met with growing respect from air traffic control, who were beginning to realize that Captain Mitchell's seemingly erratic flight pattern was actually a masterclass in weather avoidance. The storm system continued to intensify, eventually becoming one of the most destructive weather events in southeastern aviation history. Multiple aircraft made emergency landings, several flights were diverted hundreds of miles from their destinations, and the FAA temporarily closed airspace across 3 states. Through it all, Flight 1247 maintained smooth flight conditions following invisible atmospheric highways that only Sarah Mitchell could perceive. The woman who had been labeled bad luck was proving to be the most skilled atmospheric navigator in commercial aviation. But the true test was still ahead. The storm system was moving eastward, and Miami International Airport was directly in its path. Sarah would need to time their approach perfectly to land safely before the weather system reached the coast. The lives of 147 people depended on her ability to read atmospheric conditions that remained invisible to everyone else. As they began their descent toward Miami, Sarah could already sense the leading edge of the storm system approaching the airport. The next hour would determine whether her reputation as a harbinger of bad luck would finally be replaced by recognition as one of the most gifted pilots in aviation history. Miami International Airport was experiencing one of the most chaotic nights in its operational history. The massive storm system that had devastated the southeastern corridor was now racing toward the Florida coast at unprecedented speed. Airport Operations Manager Catherine Rodriguez was coordinating emergency protocols as multiple flights requested immediate landing clearance to avoid the incoming weather. "We have 17 aircraft requesting priority landing," announced Air Traffic Controller Marcus Thompson over the radio. "The storm system will reach our airspace in approximately 45 minutes. We need to get these planes on the ground fast." Flight 1247 was among those aircraft, but Sarah Mitchell was experiencing something that set her apart from every other pilot in the air that night. While other pilots were relying on radar and weather reports to gauge the storm's approach, Sarah could feel the atmospheric pressure building like a physical weight pressing against her consciousness. The storm wasn't just approaching Miami, it was accelerating. "Miami approach, this is Continental 1247, Sarah transmitted. "Request immediate clearance for approach. The weather system is moving faster than predicted." Controller Thompson checked his radar display. "Continental 1247, you're number 7. In sequence. Estimated approach time is 32 minutes. Miami approach, I need you to understand, we don't have 32 minutes. This storm is going to hit the airport in less than 25 minutes. Thompson glanced at his weather display, which showed the storm system still 40 miles offshore. "Continental 1247, current weather data indicates we have adequate time for normal approach sequence." In the aircraft cabin, passengers were looking out the windows at what appeared to be clear skies ahead. The Miami skyline was visible in the distance, illuminated by city lights that gave no indication of the atmospheric chaos bearing down on them. Flight attendant Rebecca Martinez was preparing the cabin for landing when she noticed the tension in Captain Mitchell's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position. We may experience some minor turbulence during our approach." What Rebecca didn't know was that Sarah's definition of minor turbulence had been calibrated by months of navigating atmospheric conditions that other pilots couldn't detect. The pressure changes she was sensing suggested that Miami International would soon be experiencing wind shear conditions that could make landing extremely dangerous. Dr. Elena Vasquez was monitoring the situation from her laboratory, watching as her atmospheric sensors registered pressure drops that indicated the storm system was intensifying as it approached the coast. She had been in communication with Miami International's meteorology department, but her warnings about accelerated storm movement were being met with skepticism. "The storm is moving at nearly twice the predicted speed," she explained to Chief Meteorologist Angela Foster at Miami International. "Any aircraft still in the air when it hits the airport is going to encounter severe wind shear." Foster was coordinating with air traffic control, but the official weather model still showed adequate time for normal landing operations. "Dr. Vasquez, we appreciate your input, but our radar shows the storm system is still 35 miles out. We have time to get these aircraft down safely." Sarah could feel the atmospheric disturbance growing stronger as they approached Miami. The air currents were becoming increasingly chaotic, with pressure variations that suggested violent wind patterns were developing just ahead of the visible storm front. She made a decision that would once again put her at odds with standard procedures. Miami approach, Continental 1247 requesting immediate priority landing clearance. "I'm declaring a weather emergency." The declaration sent a shock through the control tower. A weather emergency meant that Captain Mitchell believed her aircraft was in immediate danger from atmospheric conditions, but the current radar showed clear skies around the airport. Continental 1247, negative on weather emergency. Current conditions are within normal parameters. Maintain present position in approach sequence. David Chun looked at Sarah with concern. "Sarah, if you're wrong about this, declaring a false emergency is going to end your career permanently." Sarah could feel the invisible wall of atmospheric chaos approaching the airport like a tsunami of air. "David, look at the pressure readings from the airport weather station. Check the wind direction indicators." Chun accessed the real-time weather data and saw something that made him pause. The barometric pressure at Miami International was dropping rapidly, and wind direction indicators were showing sudden, inexplicable changes. The condition suggested severe weather was imminent, despite the clear appearance of the surrounding airspace. "Sarah, these readings don't match what we're seeing visually, but they're consistent with your weather emergency declaration." In the control tower, Marcus Thompson was receiving conflicting information from multiple sources. The radar showed clear conditions, but atmospheric monitoring equipment was registering pressure changes that suggested severe weather was approaching much faster than predicted. "All aircraft in Miami approach airspace, be advised we're receiving reports of rapidly changing weather conditions. Expedite your approaches and be prepared for possible go-arounds." Flight 1247 was still 7th in the landing sequence when Sarah saw the first visual signs of the approaching storm. Lightning flashes were beginning to appear on the eastern horizon, and she could see a dark wall of clouds racing toward the airport at tremendous speed. "Miami approach, the storm front is now visible from our position. I'm estimating the impact with the airport in less than 15 minutes. We need immediate clearance." Thompson made a command decision that would save multiple lives. "Continental 1247, you're cleared for immediate approach. All other aircraft, extend your patterns and stand by for weather updates." The decision was controversial and would later be investigated by the FAA, but Thompson had learned to trust Captain Mitchell's weather predictions over the past few hours. If she said the storm was coming faster than predicted, he was willing to believe her. As Flight 1247 began its approach to Miami International, the first aircraft in the original landing sequence encountered severe wind shear just as Sarah had predicted. Eastern Airlines Flight 892 was forced to execute an emergency go-around when sudden crosswinds made landing impossible. All aircraft, Miami International, are now experiencing severe wind shear conditions, Thompson announced. The airport will be closed to incoming traffic in approximately 10 minutes. Sarah guided Flight 1247 through the increasingly turbulent air, using her atmospheric sensing abilities to find pockets of stable air that allowed for a smooth descent. The passengers felt only minor turbulence, unaware that they were threading their way through atmospheric conditions that were forcing other aircraft to divert to alternate airports. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach to Miami International," Sarah announced. "We should be on the ground in just a few minutes." Passenger Michael Torres was watching the approach from his window seat when he saw lightning beginning to flash in the distance. The meteorologist in him realized that Captain Mitchell had once again positioned their aircraft to arrive just ahead of dangerous weather conditions. In the control tower, Thompson was coordinating the emergency closure of the airport as the storm system reached the field. Winds were now gusting to over 60 miles per hour, and visibility was dropping rapidly as the first bands of rain reached the runway. "Continental 1247, you're cleared to land runway 08 right. The advised winds are gusting to 45 knots with rapid changes in direction." Sarah felt the aircraft responding to the increasingly violent air currents as they descended through 1,000 feet. The landing would require every bit of her skill and atmospheric awareness to execute safely. One mistake, one moment of losing contact with the invisible currents that were guiding her, and 147 people would pay the price. The runway lights appeared through the gathering darkness as Flight 1247 descended through the final 500 feet of their approach. Behind them, the storm system was engulfing Miami International Airport, but ahead of them lay the safety of solid ground and the vindication of Sarah Mitchell's extraordinary abilities. What happened in the next few minutes would determine whether Sarah's reputation as a harbinger of bad luck would finally be replaced by recognition as one of the most gifted atmospheric navigators in aviation history. Flight 1247 touched down on runway 08 right at Miami International Airport at 3:42 a.m. Just 6 minutes before the storm system unleashed its full fury on the field. The landing was so smooth that many passengers didn't realize they had touched ground until they felt the aircraft's brakes engaging. Behind them, the sky erupted in a display of lightning and torrential rain that forced the immediate closure of all airport operations. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Sarah Mitchell felt a profound sense of relief mixed with vindication. For the first time in 3 years, she had followed her atmospheric instincts without facing criticism or investigation. The 147 people aboard Flight 1247 owed their lives to her ability to perceive weather patterns that remained invisible to conventional meteorology. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miami," Sarah announced over the intercom. "I want to thank you for your patience with our extended flight time tonight. Due to severe weather conditions that developed rapidly along our original route, we needed to take a longer path to ensure your safety. The airport is now closed due to the storm system we avoided." In the passenger cabin, the reality of what had occurred was beginning to sink in. Michael Torres, the meteorologist, was studying weather radar images on his tablet that showed the massive storm system now pummeling the airport. Their aircraft had landed in what appeared to be the last possible window before conditions became too dangerous for any flight operations. "That woman just saved our lives," Torres said to the passenger sitting next to him. "I've been studying weather patterns for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone predict atmospheric conditions with that level of accuracy." Flight attendant Rebecca Martinez was securing the cabin when she overheard conversations among passengers who were beginning to understand the significance of their flight path. Janet Cooper, who had complained about the delays earlier in the evening, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Please tell Captain Mitchell that I'm sorry I complained about the longer flight time. I had no idea she was keeping us safe." The Scene at the gate was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her career. As passengers disembarked, many stopped to thank her personally for the safe flight. Word was spreading quickly about Flight 1247's miraculous avoidance of the storm system, and airport personnel were gathering to witness the arrival of the aircraft that had somehow navigated safely through conditions that had forced the closure of airspace across multiple states. Shun was shaking his head in amazement as they completed their post-flight procedures. "Sarah, I owe you more than an apology. I've been flying for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. How do you see weather patterns that don't show up on radar?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question for years. "David, I honestly don't know how to explain it. It's like having a sixth sense for atmospheric pressure. I can feel weather systems building hours before they become visible." Continental Airways Operations Manager Robert Harrison was waiting at the gate when Sarah deplaned. Instead of the disciplinary meeting she had been expecting, he greeted her with an expression of profound respect. "Captain Mitchell, I need to apologize on behalf of the entire airline. We've been investigating you for irregular procedures when we should have been studying your methods. You've just demonstrated a level of weather prediction that could revolutionize aviation safety." The transformation in attitude was remarkable but not universal. Within hours of landing, Sarah's flight path was being analyzed by meteorologists, aviation safety experts, and atmospheric scientists from around the world. Dr. Elena Vasquez had documented the entire event, creating a comprehensive record of Sarah's atmospheric predictions and their correlation with actual weather development. This represents the most significant advancement in weather prediction methodology in decades, Dr. Vasquez explained to a hastily assembled panel of aviation officials. Captain Mitchell demonstrated the ability to detect atmospheric changes up to 4 hours before they appeared on conventional radar. Her flight path saved 147 lives and provides a roadmap for improving weather detection systems. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an immediate investigation, but the tone was completely different from previous inquiries into Sarah's methods. Instead of looking for violations of standard procedures, investigators were trying to understand how her atmospheric sensing abilities could be incorporated into aviation safety protocols. FAA investigator Colonel James Wright interviewed Sarah 3 days after the flight, approaching her abilities with scientific curiosity rather than skepticism. "Captain Mitchell, we need to understand your methodology for detecting atmospheric changes. The implications for aviation safety are enormous." Sarah had spent years trying to explain her abilities to skeptical colleagues, but this conversation felt different. "Colonel Wright, I've been trying to understand it myself. I can sense pressure changes and air current variations that seem to predict weather development. It's not something I learned, it's more like a natural ability that developed over years of flying." The interview lasted 6 hours and resulted in a comprehensive report that would change how the aviation industry approached weather prediction. The FAA recommended that Sarah be assigned to a special research program aimed at developing new atmospheric detection methods based on her observations. Meanwhile, the media had discovered the story of Flight 1247 and Sarah's extraordinary navigation skills. News outlets across the country were reporting on the pilot who had been labeled bad luck, but had saved 147 lives through her unconventional weather prediction abilities. Dr. Vasquez found herself fielding calls from research institutions around the world who wanted to study Sarah's atmospheric sensing capabilities. The University of Colorado offered Sarah a position as a consultant for their atmospheric research program, and the National Weather Service requested her assistance in developing improved storm prediction models. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah's relationship with her colleagues at Continental Airways. Pilots who had previously avoided her were now seeking her advice on weather-related decisions. Flight attendants requested assignments to her flights, knowing that her atmospheric awareness resulted in smoother, safer flying conditions. Captain Linda Thompson formally apologized to Sarah during a meeting that was attended by the airline's senior management team. "Sarah, we made a serious mistake in questioning your methods instead of trying to understand them. Continental Airways would like to offer you a position as our chief weather consultant, in addition to your flying duties." The offer represented a complete vindication of Sarah's approach to flying, but it also came with new responsibilities. She would be expected to share her knowledge with other pilots and help develop training programs that incorporated atmospheric awareness into standard flight procedures. Sarah's personal life also began to improve. Her relationship with Maria Santos, which had been strained by the constant investigations and career uncertainty, was renewed by the recognition of Sarah's abilities. Maria had always believed in Sarah's intuitive understanding of weather patterns, and seeing that faith validated brought them closer together. "I'm proud of you," Maria told her one evening as they watched news coverage of Flight 1247. "You never gave up on what you knew was right, even when everyone else doubted you." The passengers from Flight 1247 organized a reunion 6 months later, bringing together people whose lives had been saved by Sarah's atmospheric sensing abilities. Michael Torres had used his experience to write a research paper on intuitive weather prediction that was published in the Journal of Applied Meteorology. "Captain Mitchell didn't just save our lives," he said during the reunion. "She opened up an entirely new field of atmospheric research that could benefit aviation safety for generations to come." Sarah attended the reunion as a guest of honor, but she remained humble about her role in the events of that night. "I was just doing my job," she told the gathered passengers. "I saw weather patterns developing, and I adjusted our flight path accordingly. The real heroes were the air traffic controllers who trusted my judgment when conventional radar showed clear skies." The story of Flight 1247 became a case study in aviation schools around the world, demonstrating the importance of individual expertise and intuitive understanding in flight safety. Sarah's methods were incorporated into weather prediction training programs, and her atmospheric sensing techniques became the foundation for new research into human perception of atmospheric changes. 3 years later, Sarah Mitchell was recognized by the National Weather Service for her contributions to atmospheric science and aviation safety. The woman who had been labeled a harbinger of bad luck had become one of the most respected weather prediction experts in the aviation industry. But for Sarah, the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her ability to perceive invisible atmospheric patterns had saved lives. Every time she took to the skies, she carried with her the knowledge that 147 people were alive, because she had trusted her instincts over conventional wisdom. The invisible highways of air that had guided her through that crucial night remained as clear to her as ever, continuing to whisper their secrets to the pilot, who had learned to listen to the sky itself. 5 years after Flight 1247, the aviation industry had fundamentally changed how it approached weather prediction and pilot intuition. The Mitchell Protocol, named after Sarah's groundbreaking atmospheric sensing methods, was now standard training at every major airline. What had once been dismissed as irregular procedures was now recognized as advanced atmospheric awareness that could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Auditorium at the Potsdam International Aviation Safety Conference in Chicago, addressing an audience of pilots, meteorologists, and safety officials from around the world. The woman who had once been isolated by her colleagues was now one of the most sought-after speakers in aviation safety. The night of Flight 1247 taught us that human perception can sometimes detect atmospheric changes that our most sophisticated instruments miss, Sarah began. But more importantly, it taught us the value of trusting experienced pilots when they report conditions that don't match conventional data. In the audience, Dr. Alina Vasquez smiled as she listened to Sarah's presentation. The collaboration between the two women had resulted in the development of new atmospheric monitoring equipment that combined traditional meteorological data with human sensory observations. The Vasquez-Mitchell detection system was now being tested at airports across North America. Captain David Chun, who had been Sarah's co-pilot that crucial night, was now heading Continental Airways' new atmospheric awareness training program. The curriculum he developed incorporated Sarah's techniques with conventional weather education, teaching pilots to recognize subtle atmospheric cues that might indicate developing weather systems. We've reduced weather-related incidents by 37% since implementing the Mitchell Protocol, Chun explained to a group of new pilot trainees. Captain Mitchell showed us that the sky speaks to those who know how to listen. The ripple effects of that December night extended far beyond commercial aviation. The National Weather Service had integrated Sarah's atmospheric observations into their storm prediction models, improving forecast accuracy by significant margins. Dr. Vasquez's research team had discovered that approximately 2% of the population possessed varying degrees of atmospheric sensitivity, leading to the establishment of a new field called environmental sensory science. Rebecca Martinez, the flight attendant from Flight 1247, had used her experience that night to develop new passenger communication protocols for weather-related flight changes. Her training program helped cabin crews better explain atmospheric conditions to passengers, reducing anxiety during weather-related delays or route changes. Passengers are much more understanding when they know their crew is actively working to ensure their safety, Martinez explained during a flight attendant conference. Captain Mitchell taught us that sometimes the safest route isn't the fastest route. The passengers from Flight 1247 had become an unlikely extended family, bonding over their shared experience of having their lives saved by Sarah's atmospheric intuition. Michael Torres had left his meteorology position to work directly with Sarah's research team, developing new methods for training atmospheric sensitivity in pilots and meteorologists. That night changed my entire understanding of weather prediction, Torres reflected during the 5th anniversary reunion of Flight 1247 passengers. We were so focused on technology that we forgot the value of human observation and intuition. Janet Cooper, the business traveler who had initially complained about the flight delays, had become one of Sarah's most vocal advocates, she testified before congressional committees about the importance of supporting pilot expertise and atmospheric research funding. Captain Mitchell saved my life and the lives of 146 other people because she trusted her instincts over her instruments, Cooper told the House Transportation Committee. We need to ensure that future pilots receive training in atmospheric awareness and are empowered to act on their observations. The legal implications of Sarah's actions had been thoroughly examined by aviation attorneys and regulatory officials. The precedent set by Flight 1247 had led to new FAA guidelines that protected pilots who deviated from standard procedures based on legitimate safety concerns, even when those concerns couldn't be immediately verified by conventional instruments. Detective James Rodriguez, who had initially investigated Sarah for potential fraud, had become an unlikely ally in promoting pilot intuition training. His experience investigating the case had taught him the value of expertise that couldn't be easily quantified or explained. Captain Mitchell's case taught law enforcement to distinguish between genuine expertise and suspicious behavior, Rodriguez explained to a conference of aviation security officials. Sometimes the most unconventional actions are actually the most professional. Continental Airways had transformed from an organization that viewed Sarah with suspicion to one that celebrated her contributions to aviation safety. The airline's safety record had improved dramatically since implementing atmospheric awareness training, and Sarah's methods had been adopted by airlines worldwide. Captain Linda Thompson, who had once questioned Sarah's procedures, was now Continental's Vice President of Safety Innovation. Sarah Mitchell revolutionized how we think about weather prediction and pilot decision-making, Thompson announced during the airline's annual safety conference. Her legacy will be measured in the thousands of lives saved by pilots who learned to trust their atmospheric instincts. The technology sector had also taken notice of Sarah's abilities. Several companies were developing sensors designed to detect the subtle atmospheric changes that Sarah could perceive naturally. While no artificial system had yet matched her sensitivity, the research was producing new tools for meteorologists and pilots. Sarah's personal life had flourished alongside her professional recognition. Her relationship with Maria Santos had strengthened through the shared experience of seeing Sarah's abilities finally understood and valued. They had married 3 years after Flight 1247, surrounded by passengers, crew members, and colleagues who had witnessed Sarah's transformation from outcast to hero. "Sarah taught me that being different isn't the same as being wrong," Maria said during their wedding reception. "Sometimes the people who see the world differently are the ones who can save it." The research into atmospheric sensitivity had revealed fascinating insights about human perception and environmental awareness. Studies had shown that some individuals possessed heightened sensitivity to barometric pressure, electromagnetic changes, and other atmospheric variables that could indicate weather development. Sarah had become the primary subject of ongoing research at the University of Colorado's Atmospheric Perception Laboratory. Brain imaging studies revealed unusual activity in regions associated with sensory processing when Sarah was exposed to atmospheric pressure changes, providing scientific validation for abilities that had once seemed mystical. Captain Mitchell's brain processes atmospheric information in ways we're still trying to understand, explained Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead researcher on the project. Her abilities represent a form of human evolution that could be crucial for climate adaptation. The environmental implications of Sarah's work extended beyond aviation safety. Climate scientists had begun studying atmospheric sensitivity as a potential tool for understanding rapid climate changes that traditional instruments might miss. The ability to perceive subtle environmental shifts could prove valuable as weather patterns became more unpredictable due to climate change. Sarah's speaking engagements now took her around the world, sharing her story with audiences who ranged from elementary school students to international climate researchers. Her message remained consistent: trust your instincts, value expertise over convention, and never stop listening to what the environment is trying to tell you. The sky has been speaking to humans for thousands of years, Sarah told a group of young aviation students. We just forgot how to listen. The night of Flight 1247 reminded us that some of the most important information can't be found on instruments, it has to be felt. The memorial established for Flight 1247 at Miami International Airport bore a simple inscription: in recognition of Captain Sarah Mitchell and the 147 lives saved through atmospheric awareness and professional courage. The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for pilots and meteorologists who wanted to honor the night that changed aviation safety forever. As Sarah approached her 50th birthday, she reflected on the journey from being labeled bad luck to becoming one of the most respected figures in aviation safety. The invisible patterns in the sky that had guided her through that crucial December night continued to whisper their secrets. But now she had an entire community of people who understood the value of listening. The legacy of Flight 1247 would continue for generations, carried forward by pilots trained in atmospheric awareness, meteorologists who valued human observation, and passengers who understood that sometimes the safest path isn't the most direct one. Sarah Mitchell had proven that being different wasn't a curse, it was a gift that could save lives. And in a world where technology often overshadowed human intuition, she had reminded everyone that the most sophisticated instrument ever created was still the human brain, capable of perceiving patterns that no machine could detect. the woman they once called bad luck had become aviation's guardian angel, watching over the skies and teaching others to see the invisible highways of air that connected all life on Earth. The international implications of Sarah's discovery had reached the highest levels of government and scientific research. The Department of Transportation had established the Mitchell Institute for Atmospheric Safety, a research facility dedicated to studying environmental sensitivity and its applications in transportation safety. Foreign governments sent delegations to study her methods, hoping to implement similar programs in their own aviation systems. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Japan's Aviation Safety Institute spent 6 months working with Sarah to understand her atmospheric perception techniques. In Japanese culture, we have a concept called kiwo yomu, reading the air, Dr. Tanaka explained. Captain Mitchell has demonstrated that this traditional wisdom has scientific applications that could transform global aviation safety. The economic impact of Sarah's contributions was equally remarkable. Insurance companies had begun offering reduced premiums to airlines that implemented atmospheric awareness training. The reduction in weather-related incidents had saved the aviation industry an estimated $2.8 billion in the 5 years following Flight 1247. While passenger confidence in air travel had reached historic highs, financial analyst Gregory Walsh presented these findings to the International Air Transport Association, demonstrating how investment in human intuition training had generated measurable returns. The Mitchell Protocol isn't just about safety, Walsh reported. It's about creating a more efficient, profitable, and trustworthy aviation system. Sarah's influence had extended into unexpected areas of scientific research. Marine navigation specialists were studying her methods to improve storm prediction for shipping routes. Mountaineering organizations consulted with her team to develop better weather awareness training for high-altitude expeditions. Even urban planners were exploring how atmospheric sensitivity could inform city design and emergency preparedness. The education sector had embraced Sarah's story as a powerful example of perseverance and unconventional thinking. Business schools taught case studies about leadership under pressure and the importance of trusting expertise over popular opinion. Psychology programs examined her experience as a study in resilience and professional integrity. Professor Lisa Shun at Harvard Business School had developed an entire curriculum around the Flight 1247 case study. Sarah Mitchell's story teaches us about the courage required to stand by your convictions when everyone around you thinks you're wrong. Professor Shun explained to her leadership seminar. It also demonstrates how organizations can miss opportunities for innovation when they prioritize conformity over competence. The technological developments inspired by Sarah's abilities had led to breakthrough innovations in environmental monitoring. Biotech companies were developing wearable devices that could detect subtle atmospheric changes, potentially helping people with weather-sensitive conditions like arthritis or migraines. Agricultural researchers were exploring how atmospheric sensitivity could improve crop management and weather-related farming decisions. Startup company Atmosense had raised $50 million in venture capital to develop commercial applications of atmospheric perception research. CEO Marcus Rivera credited Sarah's work as the foundation for their entire business model. Captain Mitchell proved that humans can detect environmental changes that our current technology misses, Rivera explained. We're building tools to amplify and standardize those abilities. The military applications of atmospheric awareness had attracted attention from defense departments around the world. Special operations units were receiving training based on Sarah's methods, learning to use environmental cues for tactical advantage. Drone operators were being taught to recognize atmospheric conditions that might affect unmanned aircraft performance. Colonel Patricia Hayes from the Air Force Special Operations Command had worked directly with Sarah to develop training protocols for combat pilots. In hostile environments, The ability to predict weather changes can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe, Colonel Hayes noted. Captain Mitchell's techniques give our pilots an edge that no enemy can anticipate or counter. The scientific community had established the annual Mitchell Symposium on Atmospheric Perception, bringing together researchers from diverse fields to share discoveries and collaborate on new applications. The symposium had become one of the most prestigious conferences in environmental science, attracting Nobel laureates and breakthrough researchers from around the globe. Dr. Rachel Kim from MIT's Environmental Sensing Laboratory presented research showing that atmospheric sensitivity might be linked to genetic markers that could be identified and potentially enhanced through training. We're discovering that what Captain Mitchell can do naturally might be teachable to a much broader population, Dr. Kim announced at the symposium. The implications for environmental monitoring and disaster preparedness are staggering. Sarah's work had also influenced cultural and artistic communities. Documentary filmmakers had chronicled her story. Musicians had composed pieces inspired by her connection to atmospheric rhythms, and writers had explored themes of intuition versus technology in works directly influenced by flight. 1247 Academy Award-winning director Angela Martinez had spent 2 years creating a documentary about Sarah's journey called Reading the Wind. The film had sparked global conversations about the value of human expertise in an increasingly automated world. Sarah's story resonates because it reminds us that humans still have capabilities that machines cannot replicate, Martinez explained during the film's premiere. In an age of artificial intelligence and automation, she proves that human intuition remains irreplaceable. The philosophical implications of Sarah's abilities had attracted attention from academics studying consciousness and perception. Universities offered courses examining the relationship between human awareness and environmental systems. Philosophers debated whether atmospheric sensitivity represented a form of extended cognition or DEMONSTRATED, previously unknown aspects of human consciousness. Dr. William Foster at Oxford University had written extensively about the epistemological questions raised by Sarah's case. Captain Mitchell's abilities challenge our understanding of how humans can know things about their environment. Dr. Foster wrote in his influential paper, Atmospheric Consciousness and Environmental Knowledge. Her story forces us to reconsider the boundaries between subjective experience and objective reality. The therapeutic applications of atmospheric awareness had led to new treatments for anxiety and depression. Psychologists had discovered that teaching patients to recognize environmental patterns could improve their sense of control and reduce feelings of helplessness. Mental health professionals were incorporating atmospheric mindfulness techniques into their treatment programs. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a clinical psychologist specializing in environmental therapy, had developed treatment protocols based on Sarah's mindfulness techniques. When people learn to tune into atmospheric changes, they often develop a greater sense of connection to their environment and improved emotional regulation, Dr. Walsh explained. Captain Mitchell's methods have applications far beyond aviation. The religious and spiritual communities had also found meaning in Sarah's story. Some viewed her abilities as evidence of divine guidance, while others saw them as proof of humanity's deep connection to natural systems. Interfaith conferences had discussed the spiritual implications of environmental sensitivity and its role in understanding humanity's place in the natural world. Reverend Michael Thompson had incorporated Sarah's story into his sermons about faith and perseverance. Captain Mitchell trusted in abilities that others couldn't understand or verify, Reverend Thompson told his congregation. Her story teaches us about the courage required to follow your calling, even when the path seems uncertain. The global climate research community had embraced Sarah's work as a potential tool for understanding rapid environmental changes. As climate patterns became more unpredictable, the ability to sense subtle atmospheric shifts could provide early, Warning systems for extreme weather events. Dr. Carlos Rodriguez from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had incorporated atmospheric sensitivity research into climate adaptation strategies. As weather patterns become more volatile due to climate change, human environmental awareness could become a crucial component of early warning systems. Dr. Rodriguez noted in his Climate Resilience Report Sarah's influence on the next generation of pilots and scientists continued to grow through educational programs and mentorship initiatives. The Mitchell Foundation had established scholarships for students interested in atmospheric research and environmental sensing. Young people from around the world applied to work with Sarah's research team, hoping to develop their own atmospheric awareness abilities. 20-year-old pilot candidate Ashley Chun had been accepted into the first class of the Mitchell Atmospheric Awareness Program. Captain Mitchell showed us that being different can be a superpower, Chun explained during her interview. I want to learn to read the sky the way she does, and maybe save lives the way she did. The story of Flight 1247 had become more than a tale of aviation safety. It had evolved into a symbol of human potential and the importance of trusting expertise over conformity. Sarah Mitchell had proven that individual insight could transform entire industries, and that being labeled as different didn't mean being wrong. As Sarah looked toward the future, she knew that her greatest achievement wasn't the recognition or the scientific discoveries that had followed her atmospheric predictions. Her greatest achievement was the knowledge that 147 people were alive, because she had trusted her instincts and followed the invisible patterns that others couldn't see. The legacy of that December night would continue to ripple through generations, inspiring people to trust their unique abilities and reminding the world that sometimes the most important truths can only be perceived by those brave enough to see beyond conventional wisdom. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.